Hello and welcome, and again, thanks to Basketball UK and all of you for being here tonight. I know you're hustling from somewhere, and again, gave something up tonight in order to be here, so just want to acknowledge you for the things that you gave up, the hustle that you put in order to be here, and just your willingness to learn to help put yourself and athletes, and we're looking forward to sharing with you and learning from the questions and whatever we can do. So if you have questions at any time, please feel free to raise your hand, and we'll get to those throughout the session. And again, building on yesterday and what we started to dive into, we're looking to build on to that with today. So some of the stuff that might not come up, we'll leave some time at the end as well to ask those questions, and we'll get going through that. So today what we're going to start with sort of the theory behind dynamic one-on-one, as well as depth of a skill or phases of a skill. And so we'll be starting to work on that and then show you what some of that looks like on the floor, but allow for that to run a little bit smoother by starting with the theory first. So just in case you weren't there yesterday, Mike's here, and we both work for Canada Basketball. Mike's here. He works more with women's high performance right now, directly with them and working with our Olympic team for us to strive for 2020 with those goals. And my name's Smyth, and I work with Canada Basketball in domestic development, so working with athlete, coach, and referee development throughout our country. So if you want to contact us at any time, want to follow up, there's our contact info. And if we don't answer right away, send another email. Probably our biggest constraint is time, although I'd love to get to everyone all the time, but it is not offensive to have a second and third email, and it has nothing to do with your email personally. It's just more about the time when I happen to be overseas or something like this. So feel free to jump into that. So yesterday we started to look at loads, and we looked at a drill or an activity, and we looked at several different ways to load it. So that's definitely one way to challenge a skill or challenge athletes in different situations. So that's some of the stuff that came from yesterday. But what we're going to look at today is what we call either depth of a skill or phases of a skill. And that the skill itself, actually, we talk about it in 4 different phases. So we've got a phase A, phase B, phase C, and a phase D. And we'll dive into each one of those phases, but by doing this, it helps us in these areas. So teaching the skill itself, knowing what area or what depth of that skill, what phase of that skill we're actually targeting when we create practice or the drill or the environment to which you're actually teaching the skill. We also look at it in terms of assessment. So, taking a look at an athlete and seeing what phase of that skill they actually need to work on. Often we'll turn around and say, they need to work on shooting, or they need to look on their set shot. But what part of the shot do they need to work on? Under what phase and what depth of that skill? So I'll explain what that means, but that's one of the ways we use it. Monitoring. So if they're at that depth at this point, how do I know they've got better? Okay, so monitoring to make sure that the skill's actually improving. So we'll use it with that. Identification. So looking at roles on the floor, looking at teams, trying to identify athletes coming up, so maybe targeting for later. We'll definitely use this, and as well as feedback. So if they come into a, let's say, national team training camp, we'd used to write up a report, and we'd say, this guard needs better handles. Well, when you send that back to a coach, what exactly are they supposed to do to create handles? Or even like they need a better crossover. Under what conditions do they need a better crossover? Or a change of direction move, let's say. So it also helps with the feedback and identification. And finally, in terms of error detection, really trying to figure out what is the problem with the single skill. And then, of course, what can we do to improve it? So these are the areas, and after we dive into it, we'll go back to that to see how we can actually use it. So if we start with phase A, it's a bit of a graph to decipher what's going on with phase A. So on the left-hand side, you can kind of see form. On the bottom, you see game speed. And when you take a look at an ideal pathway, if you were to first introduce a skill to an athlete, they start at not knowing anything, and they go kind of up into this line. Now, that is far from realistic, and that's not actually what happens. But what we're working on in phase A is we're focusing on the form of the actual skill, okay? But, it's not good enough just to be able to have proper form when executing a skill. So if we just, think very simply of a layup, right? If you can do a layup, but it's as slow as a molasses, it's actually not exactly where you want that layup to be. So we also want to move that layup into a learning speed and moving through to a game speed to which a layup occurs. Now, all of this is happening with no defense, no decision, nothing's going on. It's literally me at a hoop, and that's where we refer it to on air. It's you against space and air. There's no one else even there. Now, having said that, sometimes we'll put into a guide and these other situations, but you're really focusing on the speed to which the skill is being done and the form to which the athlete is doing the skill. And that's what you're focusing in this phase A environment. So if you think of, a lot of warm-up drills, the typical 2 lines with a layup where, there's a pass and someone goes to finish the layup, that is all phase A when it comes to the layup. Everything's happening in a phase A depth of that skill. There's no decisions that are being made, there's no pressure, there's no competition, they're just going up to do that layup. So when you're in phase A, you want to make sure that some of your KPIs, your key performance indicators, or your focuses of that actual drill is working and getting it up to game speed, and then making sure the form is good. So those are the things that you're error detecting and correcting in those scenarios when you're working within that environment. And you can see that, again, no one's going from 0 to hero up to best here in a straight line, but you'll start to see that all of a sudden, you'll see an athlete go really, really fast, but unable to do the form of the layup. So then the breakout that you have to do, the deloading, is going to be around the form. The speed's fine. So when I start to error detect around the layup, I know what I need to work on. So now I'm going to go and I'm going to start working on the form. If the form's fantastic, but it's too slow, then I know I need to put loads on a drill to make it faster. And we kind of went into that yesterday. So maybe how many layups you need to do in a certain amount of time, et cetera, to try and increase the speed. So it helps you kind of figure out what's going on. The other thing about phase A is, again, you look at the form first. So when you're introducing, look at the form first, see how the form's going. You can do it in whole or part teaching. Okay, you can switch between the two. So you don't have to go one way or the other, but knowing that you're choosing, and we talked about this yesterday, right? What I'm doing, it's because I'm choosing it based on who, right, is around me, and who's there and why they're playing, or why they're in that situation, or why I'm going to do it is based on this. So it can be done either way, and then you're going to go into the speed. And really, when you're in the phase A, you're really pushing it up to a game speed. And if you can kind of think and reflect, or next time you walk into a gym, you can see a phase A drill and the athlete's not going at game speed. Right? So they're practicing the skill at whatever speed they choose, but it's not actually going to prepare them to be able to do it at the speed to which they have to execute it in the game. So I think often, what I hear around coaches is, we have this breakaway layup. There's no one around them, and they cannot finish that. Why can't they finish that? In practice, they finish it all the time, but I get into a game, or when they're moving faster, and you might look to see, when they do that drill on air, are they actually doing it at the game speed? So then when they go to do it at the game speed, now all of a sudden they can't execute the same sort of way, okay? And then the second part with the speed is you just want to make sure that you're always making sure that the athlete actually can't play or can't execute the skill faster than your vision or your ability to control what's going on. So you have to, again, game speed is relative to the actual player too, to the speed to which they're going to play within the game. So just a couple other things about phase A. You'll often see athletes wobbling. What is a wobble? If you can think of your athletes, what does wobbling look like when you see it in your athletes? Or sound like even? Anyone think of what that looks like when they're not quite sure? What are things that you're seeing? Yeah. For sure, hesitation, absolutely. What else do you see from the athletes? Self-doubt is another one you'll see, not sure, right? Questioning, there might be questions, they might be questioning. They might become internally focused, like on what's actually going around, that skill set around them. For sure, that happens as well. There's mistakes that start getting made, and that's okay. Let them figure it out. You want to let them figure out what's going on. In phase A, it's okay to wobble. It's okay to have that going on, and it's okay to let them know what's going on. Because if you give them too much instruction, you're constantly giving them feedback and instruction, they get so frozen and their mind gets so full that it's hard for them to get into an execution. So it's okay and to be a little bit free around that wobble stage. Often where phase A drills are most effective is, again, in warm-up. So around warm-up at the beginning of practice, they work really well, starting to get the heart rate up, moving around. Also in cool downs, it's good. And anytime you need to review anything, so like teaching something maybe for the very first time or terms is a really good space for phase A. The thing about phase A is that there's not a lot of transfer to a game. Because think about it, how many times are you ever in a situation in a game where you don't have to make a decision, you don't have pressure, there's no defense around you? I mean, when does that actually happen in a game? Like, you're lucky if you can execute a breakaway something at some point, but someone's chasing you. There's still something going on around you. And so the thing is when we want to create our practices, we want to create them so much that they relate to the game. And yesterday we talked how important around LTAD, where the philosophy is this retention and transfer, right? Creating our practice environment the way we want our players to be playing, and so much so that it's transferring for the game, okay? And also, use it a bit. We tend to over phase A when we start to introduce new concepts. So we want to like phase A out of the skill, where they don't see defense very much at all, right? Or, the guide's doing the same decision over and over again. And the other thing is you can use guides in phase A and implements. And so you'll kind of see how it flows through.
But can I just say something?
Yeah, of course.
In phase A, the guides are there to help improve the form or the speed. Mm-hmm. They're not there to create a decision. And you'll see the difference between a guide in a phase A and a phase B in a second. So I stand at the rim just like this, so the person just has to go around me. I'm not forcing a decision. I'm there to help them learn how to maybe go around me. Or I can use a chair, I could use pylons. Though they can be guiding to help improve the form or the speed, but not a decision.
Perfect. So now going into the next phase of the skill, we talk about phase B. And this is really around decision making. So on the vertical column, we've got you want the correct decision, and there's two parts to decision. You want the correct decision, and you want it at the right time. Okay, so you could make the wrong decision, but the wrong decision was made at the right time, or I could make the right decision, but it was too late or too early. Okay, so those are the two components to the decision making when you're trying to error detect on that. And then there's also, at the same time, you want them to be doing the correct form, and you want it at game speed. So here at the bottom, it starts talking about the wrong time and the right time, and you want the correct decision, and it kind of moves up, but you still want to make sure it's in proper form and game speed. That's always present in phase B, because if those are missing, you need to go back to phase A and fix those pieces. Not necessarily immediately, but that's where the error likely is. And so again, you've got this little learning phase, they start developing, and then they can really execute it, the skill, as they get to the rest. So, in that layup, now, all of a sudden, it's, should I have done a layup? Should I have come to a 2-foot stop, done a power layup? Should I have done a reverse layup? They're making the decision because of some cue, and they made the decision, or they executed it at the right time. Okay? And so if you see that I went for the layup and it gets blocked, and I probably shouldn't have gone through because I didn't get my cue off that read, then that was the wrong decision, but it was the right time to make it. You see what I'm seeing with that? Okay, so it's a combination of both that you're actually pulling together on that. So this is probably the part that coaches tend to skip over the most when we go to designing training, and it's the part that we've been emphasizing the most in Canada right now. This is a huge emphasis, decision making, and again, we talked yesterday about being responsible around decision making, going back through their practice, and how many times am I putting my athletes in a position to be making decisions? When I go to design my practice, am I putting them in on air where they're doing their skills with no decisions, or am I getting them the cues and teaching them the cues so that they're making decisions and then giving them feedback based on knowing which phase of the skill we're working out right now, okay? So the thing is, you don't need absolutes in phase B. So you can leave some space for some creativity. It doesn't have to be one way, and you can allow for athletes to discover and figure things out on their own, okay? So starting to figure out what is a good decision in that space. Creativity, So we talked about this yesterday about creativity, and there's sort of the 3 parts to creativity when it goes to solving a decision. 1, it solves an actual problem, right? This is a bit of a review from yesterday. Does anyone remember a second part of creativity? Anyone call back? We talked about it when the one player inbounded the ball off the back of the defender. Do you remember when that happened? And then Mike talked about creativity. Yeah, there's a wow factor, okay? So when creativity, there's something that, is a bit unusual, a bit of a wow, like, wow, that was neat, okay? So it solves a problem, there's a wow factor, and do you remember what the third one is? Sorry? It's something new, yeah. So something that they've done before. So this is a space where when there's problems, you can allow for creativity for solving. So it doesn't have to be only one solution. You can allow for the space of creativity in this, okay? The second part on the timing is, again, that on time, you want on time and on target. So talking about the delivery or the space to which the decision has to, or the ideal scenario for where the decision is to be made. And then, again, at the right place at the right time. So we're looking at the right decision at the right time, in the right place, on time, to a target. And so those are all the components around the timing of it, okay? So some other things, and this is really important, when you go to set up phase B, is you want to have cues. You really want to teach to a cue around decision making so an athlete knows to look for something. And you don't want them to go and teach on-air layup, right, and on-air power stop, and on-air reverse layup, and then they see the cue for the first time in competition in a game. And now they've got to figure out which one's which. And you want to add that into a phase B drill and talk about those cues and teach to those cues so they know what to look for in order to go into that memory recall to be able to call out the execution that's needed, okay? You want to have an either or, and that's how you know you're in a decision. Right? So if you either see this or you're going to see that, and you're going to do one decision or the other. So that's how you know you're in the space of a decision or a phase B-like drill. Load the decision, so you don't have to put every decision in at the very beginning. You can load them as you go, and we'll show you as we move on court what that could look like, what that could possibly, and also looking back at the age and stage of the athlete. And know that you might load differently depending on what stage you're at, or you might go deeper into different loads or have more choices, more either-ors, that sort of thing. So just know that there's flexibility with those. Yeah.
One of the biggest issues we've had with coaches is on this either-or. They see about decision-making, but then they'll do the drill, and they give the same guide every single time. And they say, okay, now we're going to do the other read. Well, that's not a decision anymore. There has to be randomness. And what we usually say, if there's 2 decisions, the athlete needs to go at least 3 times. One for the one read, one for the other, and then there's, I don't know what this one's going to be. Okay, so you have to make sure there's randomness or else it's not decision making.
Yeah, good call. Perfect. And again, when you use it, a lot of times it's in individual work or some breakdown work close to the beginning of practice, and it's as you're it can also be pulled out to start a phase C or D drill, and we'll actually show that later on to you. So just kind of wear these a little bit, and as we go through the practice, start to see, challenge yourself to say, what phase would I talk about this skill? Would I label it down on paper as what phase would this drill be? So just think about that as we kind of go through. Phase C now we're talking about executing the skill with pressure. So we have still execution, which is now we want the right decision at the right time. We want it to be with proper form, and we want it at game speed. So all those things are carried through from phase A to phase B, and now we're in phase C. So the execution is the combination of those things. And then we want it under different levels of pressure. And so if you think about it, if someone were to do a layup and Mike was gapping, that is, one ability in terms of pressure, right? I just kind of have to ignore my defense. They're not really hindering me. But if he comes into an arm's length, all of a sudden now I'm doing, and there's a little bit more proximity. So do I need to move the ball around? How do I need to execute the skill at arm's length? Then there's the body. So now all of a sudden he's pretty close in the body, and now is it, making sure the guide hand's here. Maybe I'm looking at other decisions. There's other ways to execute that skill. And then of course, when we see this a lot internationally, especially, no offense, when we're playing the US, they're quite good at this. Now it's the bumping, right? So they're bumping me, and can I still have my core and be able to have that ability to finish and execute the skill. So can I do it? So the best, when you look at the best, can I be bumped while executing my crossover, my anything, my one-on-one, any skill at all, while I have that kind of pressure on me, while still doing the right decision at the right time at game speed with the proper form. Okay, so that's sort of in all. And then we have the same thing. Like, you'll see it kind of going all over, like really good execution, but only able to do it at hand pressure at the beginning, right? Or vice versa, can do it, but the execution goes down. So you know the athlete is not going to go in a straight line all the way through. They're going to bump through this, but you'll be able to place the athlete to see what it is on those two axles that you need to work on. So a couple things in terms of execution. So starting to talk about putting the athlete in neutral advantages, so not really having a huge advantage in order to execute, or big advantages. And so that gives different levels of pressure to be able to work through. And we'll talk about some of those situations as we get into this dynamic one, and whether it's a neutral setup or what to do with a neutral setup, or if it's a small advantage. And then also to looking at defensive players when they're executing, that they can turn sometimes a small advantage into a neutral, by neutralizing the offense, or into a disadvantage where the offense actually gets an advantage out of it. Okay, so working with advantages and disadvantages.
Let's just show
Sure.
that real quick. So if Dawn has a ball and I'm in this situation, is this a big, small, or neutral advantage?
Or disadvantage.
Let's talk offense first. Or disadvantage? That's a big advantage, right? She's a wide open layup. So anytime that somebody can create that wide open score or shot, that's a big advantage. If I now played her here, she has what? A small. She has a small advantage.
Above.
Right? She has a small advantage. And can she turn this into the big advantage by, we call it a Cobb dribble, by cutting me off? Or can I do what? Turn it into neutral. That's the battle. That's the compete. Who wins that battle to turn it either into the big advantage, or who can turn it back to neutral on defense? So that's what we're trying to work on. Who can win those little competes? And that's what my definition of compete is. It's the little actions you take to gain an advantage on your opponent. And those happen all the time on the court. Who's winning those little battles? Okay? It's not the final score. It's those little battles on the court.
Perfect. And then when we look at pressure, the thing about pressure is it actually disrupts offense, right? So if Mike knows that on my layup, if he just bumps me a little bit, that it's likely I'm not going to finish. If he knows he can bump me on the left-hand side, if my left hand's weaker, then all of a sudden it starts disrupting offense, okay? And what you want to do with your players, if you want to put them in a situation where they cannot be disrupted through their skill sets based on levels of pressure. And so that's sort of that idea around it. And so a big gap where we've seen between phase B and C with our national team is when we went internationally historically, those are things that would throw us off. We weren't necessarily making the right decisions, or we weren't doing it at the right time. And then we'd also take a look at the level of pressure. We come up against Spain, who also puts a lot of pressure. And all of a sudden, things that were no problem in execution around another team that didn't put that bumping pressure on us, all of a sudden that same skill cannot be executed. And so, when we start to take a look at that, started to look at how do we integrate into the practice to change the skill sets so that we had better players for us to better prepare our players to play in those situations. So, again, making sure we kind of went through a couple of those layers of defense. And so when you put defense in, when you label the level of defense or that level of pressure, then when you go to put it into a drill, you can say, okay, Mike, on this one, you're going to sag. Mike, you're one hand away. Mike, you're going to be body on her, or you're going to be bumping, whoever's up. And so when you do that, then you're actually purposely putting the level of pressure, how deep in that C, and you can actually change it by player. So I might say, Mike, on one player, when you go to defend, but if you're up against another, I want them to work the skill on this, because that's how deep in the phase they have to work their skill. So you can actually then have keywords to manipulate the defender to be able to put that kind of pressure on different players. And that's how you can get into those IPPs. We talked about that yesterday, the individual performance plan. and how if you know, for example, a certain guard needs it on their left-hand side with a bump, you can actually prescribe that within a drill that's working on something totally different, but putting them in those situations through language. So of course, it's not only in one-on-one situations, so pressure can come up in multi, 2-on-2, 3-on-3, 4-on-4. And again, it's where we control that defensive pressure where we can execute this a little bit. So, and the offense isn't totally free, so we're not talking about a complete open scrimmage situation. There's some control as to what's going on. And again, it's these, we go into a phase C when a skill has to be executed against defense. So when there's defense involved in this. So the last phase is around competition. And so again, execution is now comprised of everything we've gone thus far. So we're talking about form, we're talking about speed, we're talking about decision, right decision, right time. We're talking about bumping pressure. But then now we're talking about also the level of competition. So compete happens for sure in practice, right? You might have some 4-on-4, you might have a 5-on-5 sort of compete-like scrimmage, which are the lower on the scale levels of competition. But it can build all the way up, and for us, it's like gold medal game of Olympics. How do we prepare our athletes to be able to execute that skill in the fourth quarter, when we are up, or down, in that gold medal game? And that is like, if you want to talk for our national team athletes, and again, look at your own context, this looks different, right? But within our context, that's the context to which we need to prepare this level of competition. So how do we either mimic that and get them ready for that, so that, if we have one player that tends to favor one arm or another, that they're not doing that and going back to that, because they actually only have this depth of that in that skill of that in this phase of that skill. So their right hand layup, which if they're left-handed, only gets to this, and so it shows up, in our FIBA Americas or our qualification games. But when it gets down to that last quarter in that gold medal game, all of a sudden favor to the left, because that level of competition, they start not doing that skill set. So just transferring to your own context, it might be, again, we worked on it all week in practice. We worked on whatever the spin as one of the counter moves. And you can see them and you put it in, you get an extra point if, it cross half and at some point you use the spin move. Your team would get an extra point. So you put these conditions on. And they're doing it in practice. And you go to the game and you can see that no one tries it or one person tries it. So you know that it got executed at this level in phase D, but not that level of phase D. So starting to see where it shows up for you in that competition.
Can I just share a quick story?
Yeah. Lesson
from an old coach who made lots of mistakes in their coaching. So I was introducing step backs. We were working on step back shots, and we did all this progression on air, we did all this stuff, and I worked on it for probably like half an hour, step back shooting. And then I said, okay, now we're going to compete. And I said, okay, I'm supposed to give a constraint. So if you score a step-back shot, you get this many points. If you score another way, you get the normal points. So I thought that was going to work. But the problem was, at that time, I used to always punish you when you lost the drill. The losers had to do like 5 sprints. So we go into the scrimmage or the game's approach, no one used a step back. And at the end, I'm saying to the players, like, look, we spent half an hour on this step-back shot, and now we go on. I give you a bonus for it, and no one used it. And my captain turns to me and says, Coach, why would we use something we just worked on? If we lose, we're going to run suicides. I'm not working on that shot. I'm going to take the ones I'm comfortable with. And I'm going, yep, you're right. Right? That was on me. I shouldn't have had a punishment as part of it, because people are going to go to that. We wait longer so it actually start to show up on practice on its own before I all of a sudden start punishing them because they didn't use that skill. That's an old lesson I learned.
Good. Thanks, Mike. So when we're looking at execution now, it's all of these components that are showing up, right? So, did they make the right decision in the competition environment? Was it at the right time? Was it with proper form? Was it at the game speed? Was it too slow? Could they do it under all depths of pressure? And then also we start getting into, can they perform the skill without really focusing and concentrating? We talk about it, when an athlete's in a zone or it's in their subconscious and they're just able to execute. That's where we're starting to work through with our phase D, is it's getting into that unconscious through different levels of competition, right? It's not tough in that game environment, and that's what you're trying to prepare them for. And again, this is, the depth as to where phase D could show up. So again, in practice, regional games, national games, provincial, and you can kind of go through your own context and figure out your different, bottom axes points as to where you can do a check on those athletes. And I think just building on Mike's story a little bit, where this came up and became very clear for me. So I was working with one of our men's national teams, so working with the coaches and trying to integrate, all of this LTUD and theory and all this sort of thing. And went into practice, and two things happened in that training camp. And one of them came up where they're doing the drill where it's 2-on-2 continuous, and but at the end they throw the ball, 3-on-3 continuous. One does the layup, and the other two receive the pass from outside. So if there's like two people here, one does the layup, I receive the pass, I go for a 3, and same's happening on the other side. That other person goes back with the new 3. And so I just asked the coach. I mean, training camps, we do not have a lot of time, and it costs us a lot of money, more money than we really have in our pockets, to be honest. So every single moment the athlete is in our presence, we have to make sure it's purposeful practice, which is why we really got into that yesterday, and how important purposeful and how impactful purposeful practice can be. Given that we all have time restrictions. You only have your athletes once a week, twice a week, etc. And so I asked, what was the purpose of this? What were we trying to get out of it? And he goes, well, the guys love it, and they get their shots up. And I said, okay, so it's the 3-point shot that we're looking at. So he was doing 3 sections of 2 minutes. And so, you'd get your score after 2 minutes, and then you're trying to beat it. And, 3's worth 2, and the layups are worth 1. And so we went through that a couple times, and I tracked one of our athletes on the team to see how many shots. So within 2 minutes, he got 3 shots. And then if I looked at the quality of the shot, first of all, the pass is coming from out of bounds, which again, when we go to transfer of the game, hopefully, is not occurring. So my pass is not coming from out of bounds, first of all. And second of all, the speed to which they were executing the shot, it was like, which again is not going to transfer to the game. So there we've got a drill that we would do at the beginning of every practice. We'd spend 6 minutes minimum. That's like playing time, not to mention the reset and all those other minutes that were going on. And we're going phase A with the goal of getting shots up. Within 2 minutes, you're only going to get 3 shots. And it's coming from the wrong angle, and it's not being done. So it's a phase A drill, and we're like working at that low level. When we take a look at it, we're working at the lowest level of phase A. When we take a look at one of these graphs, like we're sitting here, because it's not even close to game speed when we take a look at that. So that transfer into any game, and we just wasted probably in total about 10 minutes of our practice time on something that's not going to transfer. So that's kind of the situation. Another situation is they're teaching reads off of on-ball screens or picks. And so, they were working in the half court, and, they had baskets going, and, a lot of athletes doing a lot of things. And they would show, like a hard hedge, and they would have their read. And then they'd show a switch, and they had their read. And they would do it a bunch of times. And then, I think they had 3 reads in total. And so they did their 3 reads, their 3 defensive reads. And then they went into a compete. So they went from, a phase A drill where they're showing, showing every time. I know every time I'm coming off that there's a hedge, right? So is there an either or? Is there an either or in that situation? I hedge, you do what? You make that read. So there's a cue, but there's not an either or, so it's not a decision. Okay? And so they would block that, and then we go into a 3-on-3 compete. And so we went from phase A to now D. So we skipped B and C in terms of the skill around coming off a ball screen, coming off a pick. And so, a couple minutes into the drill, no one's making the proper read, and coach is losing it. Everybody on the line. We just worked on this for half an hour. We went through all these reads, and was so upset. So afterwards, come back, these kids, these athletes, they don't know what they're doing. They don't know how to make this read. And so, we had to go through, was it them or was it us? Put on a responsibility hat. Did we actually put them in the position to be able to compete? Now, not to say that you can never jump back and forth and in between, but if you're going to do that, and you haven't prepped the athlete with those decisions and haven't allowed them to put them in decision making, then they're going to make mistakes in that competition around that decision because they haven't been able to exercise that repeatedly. So now they got to find what that cue is and what to do around the execution of it. So going straight to compete is going to be pretty tough. If you teach it on phase A like that and then go into a game, so now we're talking going into, maybe a local game, we're halfway up that D, you're going to see lots of mistakes through that decision making. It's going to take them a while to get through because you went from A to D. Any questions around those sort of examples or going through phase A, B, C, D?
We would have national team coaches in a scout shoot-around introduce a new offense on phase A and then expect it to be used that night on phase D in an international competition. How well do you think that worked?
Transfer level on that through the athletes.
And they would continually do that. Continually do that.
Yeah.
We'll be showing that.
Yeah.
Not
So
tonight,
the question
we'll
was,
show
how would you build pick and roll, which would take like an hour to go through all the different phases. But in a nutshell, we're going to take the dynamic one-on-one and we'll build it up through. And not necessarily, you don't have to go sequentially. You just need to know what you're working on and what your key emphases are on in those. And so you can deload and go back a phase if you need to. You can jump a phase if you need to. But it's not like you don't move. It's almost like a continuum, right? You don't have to move one sequential to the other. Just know that when they're in competition, and they're doing the pick and roll, and it's the wrong decision at the wrong time, well, when you go into practice on Tuesday, then you probably want to do that skill in a phase C environment, right? And that's where that error detect and correct come in. So, so going back on these, you can see with teaching how that applies within teaching when you go to teach it. When you go to assess an athlete, you can say, you're able to come off a ball screen at a phase B, but you're not making the right decision or you're not making it at the right time, let's say. And that's where the gap is. And so now when we give that instruction to their club coach or their program coach, their academy coach, or whatever type of coach they're going back to out of the national team, they know exactly what to go in to work on in the phase of that skill. Because if you just say they need more work on the pick and roll and they go back and work it in a phase A, that athlete's coming back the exact same to you. And that was some of the things that we were encountering.
And that's how we do with women's high performances. We just had our cadet national team camp, and so we would say, so let's say it's the step back shot. I can say that, okay, this player is at a phase A. They don't even know it. This player is at a B, and here's the cues that she needs to have to help her. This is players at D, but she needs to have more of a bumping into it. Okay?
Perfect. Is there any other questions?
Right here.
Yes.
I really like this setup, and you work with that team, do you send like the feedback back to coaches? Or every coach works on base with it and work
Sure.
the same way?
Yeah, so the question was, is then when we work with the national teams and we send this feedback back to the coaches, are they on page and do they know? I mean, some of the athletes are going all the way around the world, right? We have a whole bunch in Australia. We've got, on the women's side, we've got a bunch in France. On the men's side, we have all through the EuroLeague and through Europe, and then obviously into the NBA. So no, they do not know. The younger ones, if they don't, and Mike can talk more because this is truly his job, but if they don't, in a nutshell, we would go and what we would do is target the coach to try and elevate their education. Now, having said that, we do teach this in our coaching education. So, yeah, so they could have been, they should at a bare minimum know what's going on if they're coaching a club or an athlete at that caliber, because they would have had to take the coach education at some point.
On the women's side, performance side, I track practice plans, and a coach has to put down what phase of drill they're doing. And then I actually check off, was it actually what they said? And I'm doing the debrief with them after and tell them, look, you had 80% of your drills were phase A. And I'll be honest, I'll tell them that's not acceptable. It's the same way I debrief a player. I'm very direct. If our goal is this is what you need to do. This is your growth area. And I'll be honest, if they don't change, they're probably not coaching with us. It's that simple. Now, because we're high performance. Right? We're high performance.
Yeah, but when they go back to their own programs.
But on the clubs,
Yeah.
it's the same thing. When we go back and work with the clubs, if you're coaching a national team athlete, we're telling you that this is what that athlete needs. Now,
I mean, it's not always perfect. I'll just put that out there, but we try.
but the people not in it, This is in our national coaching certification program. This is what they get. And when they get evaluated to be able to coach, they have to demonstrate that they understand loading. This is probably one of the most important things that a coach has to demonstrate in Canada in the coaching certification program, that you understand the importance of loading. Okay?
Yeah, so we name our coaching education after LTAD stages. So we design our courses, so our Learn to Train course, instead of a level 1, it's actually designed to work around Learn to Train athletes. So Train to Train is around Train to Train athletes. So for example, in Learn to Train, in order to pass your evaluation, you have to show your ability to load and deload based on those 4 and soon to be 5 different types of loads. And so they would have to do that in front of an evaluator through a practice. I mean, to be honest, our evaluators are fantastic. They're some of the best people in our country. They really, if I could go back and rename it, they're mentors. It's like the one moment in time you get to go coach and someone gives you feedback on what you're doing. And, checking off some of these things we keep talking about, where it's like hard to do on your own because you got 40 things going on and injuries and, people late and parents and blah, blah, blah. But it's the one time someone will come in and kind of help you with those pieces. And so that's one of the things they have to do. And then in Train to Train, they'll have to show phase A, B, C, and D so that, we know that they can demonstrate the competency and the ability, the evidence that they can do this. Yeah. So no, it's not perfect everywhere. There's no question. There's some, go back and forth in education, but, we're ready to work through it too, for sure.
What's your time?
Yeah, thanks. Okay, so what I'm going to ask you to do is, now we're just going to go into application. And so I'm going to ask you to try this on, get vulnerable a little bit, find a partner, pick a drill, and decide what phase, okay, A, B, C, D, phase of the skill are you teaching within that drill, and then what can you do to change it that changes that load. So you're just going to get with a partner right now. You're going to work on that. You got 2 minutes, so don't make the drill complicated. Pick something
Are you girls going to be
somewhat
the demonstrators?
easy, not a ton of rotations, and then try to apply those. Okay, so let's bring it back to the front. Anyone feel like they had some really good success or not success and want to share it and bring it up? Anyone got a drill
Okay,
sort of example that we can, yeah? Shell drill. So what phase would the shell drill be? Okay, sure. Okay, so started in phase A in a shell drill and started with the correct form in as the ball rotates. As the ball rotates, what kind of form you're in. Okay? Yeah. Starting to speed it up. So putting different loads on in order to speed up. So it might be time. There's a couple different ones for sure. And then how did you move it into, let's say, B? How did you put into a decision? Okay, and so with that, what do you have to make sure, if the purpose, so I'm going to just back it up a bit. I'm going to say that might not actually be the shell drill, but that is a decision, or what skill you're working on is help, right? Decide to help or not to help. And that's actually, and it's in the form of a shell, okay? So what you're working on there is to help or not to help. So then what you'd want to do is make cues for that defense. If you see this, right, you're going to do that. Or if you see that, you're going to do this.
We call it the switch or stay. Are you switching or staying? That's how we would teach it.
Okay? And that's how you would build it into that. And so you're doing it in the form of the shell. The skill that you're working on is to help defense, and I'm guessing through the bottom of the eye. That's the picture I got from you, but it could have been through the top of the eye as well. Right? So the skill is helping, right, at the bottom of the eye on defense. That's the actual skill. Does that help a little bit? Good. You want to try one more, maybe?
Close out situation.
Sure.
So a phase A, just a simple drill like an ancient close out, whether it's close out 3 or not get the football off it. And then you build it onto a
I'm just going to repeat it so everyone hears. So working on a closeout. So we're working on the defensive closeout. And so you're working out to an X to work on the footwork.
Yeah, just the basic motion.
Got it.
Why? And then from there, you can go player control, so you have the defender in the middle of the ball, they 5 out around the outside. The defender in the middle got possession of the they choose who they're going to pass to. They know who they're going to be defending. They pass it, they form the closeout, and then it's a live 1v1 there to some direction, but you also know the situation you're going into.
Okay, so the build on that was that, you put multiple players in multiple positions, and the player themselves is throwing the ball out to one of the players, going to a closeout, and then, playing 1v1. So what's the either-or decision?
Progress on from there,
Or sorry, before you go there, what phase is that?
I've got that around the phase B. There's no either or. You're choosing who you're going to close out, and you know whether it's a top closeout, or wing closeout, or a baseline closeout. So you start to make some decisions as to show baseline, or
Right.
show weekend.
Perfect example. So in that, I would say that's actually still guided, because they're in control of the decision. It's not like I have to, make the decision in the moment. I'm passing, knowing what my decision is. There's not even or at that situation. Does that make sense? Okay.
And then if there was a closeout with a help element as well, so if you then had another player on the wing, you're in a help position.
Sure.
On one side, and the initial thing is it going to be a skip pass in case you've got to close out right away, or is it going to be a drive in case you've got to help?
So can I go back? What's the skill you're working on? Closeout.
Yeah.
Just the closeout. Okay. So, and I'm getting from you, so just take it back, that, depending on what I'm doing, a wing closeout or a top closeout, my angles are going to be a little bit different. That's what I want to work on.
Yeah.
So the decision's going to be, if the ball goes to the wing, I'm doing that kind of closeout. If the ball goes to the top, it's that, right? But I should not know which one's coming.
Sure.
Right. As opposed to, should I close out or should I do a different skill?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
If
Yeah.
you've got the weight, we have like a follow.
Sure.
Corner.
Yeah.
So when
A drifter, yeah.
having a help thing adds an extra.
Yeah. And actually, you're bringing up a really good point. When we talk about decisions too, there's always that primary decision and then a secondary. You can add a secondary decision. So can I make the decision, can I break someone down, or, whether it's dynamically come off of the first, but then can I also do it off of the second, let's say? Or can I make the secondary decision with the help defender going through, which is also another depth of decision making for sure. Good. I'm just going to stop you there because I'm going to go through. But that's starting to get the idea around that. That's great. Is there a question or no? Up there? No? Okay, great. So that's what I would encourage you to start doing, is looking at what you have within your practice pen and trying to identify what phase it's in. Do you have something else? No? Okay. We'll do questions too at the end. Okay. Spacing. Pardon? For the
I'm
athletes
telling
now?
them to
Okay.
watch now. They got to watch this.
Okay, yeah, you guys need to know this. So I always want to talk about spacing on the court. So Mike talked a little bit about short banana, long banana, but the point behind that yesterday was just that names are important so that you can give feedback and this and that. So we're going to name the court a little bit. So on offense, just talking here on offense, we're talking about 7 spots on the floor. Okay, 7 spots on the floor. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about gaps within those 7 spots. Okay? So when we talk about the spots on the floor, the ones in the corner, so far corners, the ones in the corner are called corner. Got that? Okay, the ones coming up, so where the free throw line meets the 3-point line. So if I were to extend this free throw line right to the 3-point line, we've now got the wing. Okay, so that's the wing spot. We've got 2 swing spots. Okay, so either on the diagram or extending the wide key up to the 3-point line. So wide key, 3-point line, we've now got a swing, tops right in the middle, and then we've got the same 3 through the other side. So when we go to reference those, okay, those are the spots that we're talking about. Now I want to talk about gaps around those. So you can see we've got some of those 7 filled, okay, but you can see from the top to the wing, we've got what we're calling a gap. And this is kind of like a weird one because it's a 1.5 gap, because from the top to the swing is just a little bit tighter, but a 1.5 spacer gap. We've got double gaps, so we've got a swing spot and a wing spot open, so that's 2 to the corner, so that's a double gap. Triple gap, right? So now we've got this on the weak side, or this side of the swing spot. We've got swing spot and wing, so we've got 3 spots, that's a triple gap, okay? And then when we take a look at wing to corner here, this is a single gap, okay, when we reference those. So we'll be working through that a little bit, and what these gaps allow us to do is form rules around play. It allows the gaps allow us to attack the rim. So when there's a gap, it's a lot easier to attack. Why would that make it easier? Sorry? More space, for sure. If I put defense in there, attacking this triple gap, if you were holding this ball right here, if you can picture all the defense in there, what does this look like for you? Pretty good real estate in order to catch that. So triple gaps are really good opportunities to attack on that.
The biggest thing single or double gaps and triple gaps give you is time. It gives the person with the time to make a decision, because the help is going to get there later. And time improves my positioning, vision, anticipation, like I talked about yesterday. It's mostly that it gives you more time. And the younger the player, that's the better it is, the more time they have for their decision.
Good. So one thing, we're not going to do this right now, but one thing I'd encourage you to do, or if those of you are at home watching online, is to go through your offense and start to identify when you have single, double, triple gaps. Who is it in those positions? Okay, so what player is in that position, depending on, again, your age and stage. But in a train-to-compete team, who is it that has that ball with the single, double, or triple gap, right? And how is it that you get these gaps? How is it that you get those gaps throughout your offense? Is it coming off of actions? Is it on first side, second side? What's exactly going on in order to get it? And then pose the question, can I make any adjustments within those offenses, okay, or movements to create more gaps for my players, more attacking opportunities, okay? So ask yourself some of those, go through that exercise to see what is it, are you really, if your philosophy is to get either, a certain amount of attacks or a certain amount of points in a certain fashion, let's say attacks to the rim, but then your offense doesn't have any opportunities for double and triple caps, which are great opportunities to attack the rim, are you putting them in a position to be able to get to some of these goals that you're doing with your team? Excuse me. How many, sorry?
Post forwards.
Oh.
The one Don's shown is mostly for the learn to train stage. It's for learn to train. So the post
short
spots,
corner, front rim, both sides. Yeah.
Learn to train, it's the smile, the front of the rim, and the 2 short corners.
Yeah.
It's really those, because everybody's a player. Train to train, you'll start to introduce more of the other spots.
Not good? Yeah. So the reason why we're moving into, the first reason why I want to talk about the gaps is we're going to create some of those so we can get a dynamic one-on-one, which is where we're going with all of this. And then we'll also show it at different phases, phase A, B, C, and D. So that's also why I wanted to explain this theory before we got into the court, so that you can start identifying it with your own coach's eye. But the reasoning behind this and why, and especially for us, because we went from sort of no shot clock situations, 30 shot clock, because we played federation rules as late as like some places last year, in all honesty. But about 9 years ago, we started to make major changes towards FIBA. Some of you have been playing FIBA for a long time, but when you go on the internet, it might take some sets or offenses that are played with a 30-second shock. And so, what I want to do is, again, going back to that why. Why? Let's talk about that why when it comes to offense selection. And this is where that why will come from when you choose what you're doing. So when there's no shot clock, there's sort of breaks in actions. I can, outlet the ball, I can pivot, I can, look, I can dribble a little bit, I can pick it up, we can make a pass, that person can hold it. And there's no shot clock to limit the amount of time or space you have between some of these actions. So you can see it's quite spread out in, let's say, an offensive possession. But when I go to look at a 30-second shot clock, now all of a sudden you have to get into this sort of set scenario where they need to be closer together. You can't pause as much as in between. There has to be a little bit more flow from one action to the next. So you start seeing the actions kind of go one after another. When you get into the 24-second shot clock, it's like starting to go simultaneously. So things are happening sort of at the same time in order to save time within the shot clock to try and get the best shot opportunity. And Mike did a really good example of that yesterday when he talked about PVAD on that rebound. So they're doing the Serbian drill off the backboard. And when he asked the players to do is when they grabbed the rebound, instead of rebound, then pivot, then look to outlet, what he had them doing is grabbing the rebound and already getting into what he described as PVAD. And do we remember what PVAD is? P stands for position, vision. V stands for vision. A stands for anticipation and decision, right? So your position is going to give you the proper vision in order to anticipate the decision you got to make. So he had the rebound, and he had them already in a position where they didn't have to turn around and then pivot. And those are some of the changes that you got to make in the 24-second shot clock in order to get it now, you can see overlapping, and they're happening simultaneously so that, you know, it's not one, then the other, then the other. And with this 14-second reset, it's the same sort of situation, right? You can't get it, pivot, outlet. All right, let's set it up again, pause. Oh, no, over there, you got 14 seconds, right? So as I'm grabbing that rebound, I need someone already cutting and already reading what the read's going to be on that catch. And that's really where the dynamic one-on-one comes in, why it's really, really important, and why you need to include this into the game, as well as static one-on-one. Anything you want to add on that?
We're good.
So dynamic versus static. The difference between static is, I'm going to start with static because it's the one we all kind of know, is I catch the ball and then I'm going to make a decision. So I catch it, and now I either go to attack, so I might just go off a quick foot, I might jab and then go to my shot, but I've already caught the ball, and then I'm going to make the decision. When we talk about dynamic, it's actually now getting into that 1 second advantage. So as I'm coming to catch Mike's pass, and the basket's over here, I'm looking at my defender before I've caught to see their position, so that when I catch the ball, I'm already starting to make my read as to what goes next. Okay, so now I'm looking to try and make the decision and anticipate, because I've got a really good position and wonderful vision to be able to anticipate what I'm going to do on my decision on the dynamic. Okay, anything you want to add with that?
Nope.
Okay. So reads around that we're going to work with this dynamic one-on-one today. So again, you guys can listen to this and you're going to be able to execute it, okay? So one read is, as I'm cutting defenses trailing, my action is going to be curling. So I'm going to curl towards the rim. We'll talk about the components of that. Could be that my defense is overplaying me. Okay, so they're jumping up, and now I'm going to hockey stop, which we kind of talked about that yesterday. I'm going to hockey stop, and I'm going to cross over to go back the other direction. Okay? Defense is denying, which again, in most cases, deny. You're going to go backdoor cut. Okay, it doesn't change in this situation. Defense is gapping. Okay, often when they gap, you're looking for your shot. And the last one's one that we call good defense. So defense has actually not created any space for me to get any of these reads, right? And they've come into a good position, neutralizing me. So didn't give me an advantage, right? Not a small or a big advantage. They neutralized me, and now I become a fish hook to a 2-foot in order to become a catcher. Or sorry, a passer. Catcher to a passer is what I'd end up doing. So those are the ones that we're going to work through today. With Learn to Train, which is where we're going to start with, is we're really talking about the curl, read, and the hockey stop to a crossover. That's we're going to start looking at those, and then we'll build in the other ones, working with these young ladies to get that going. Any questions about dynamic one-on-one? No. Okay, so again, those of you that are new from yesterday, here's just some other areas you can get some more resources, what we're talking about. NCCP has a website called coach.ca, has additional resources. Fundamental movement skills are also on there. They've got some good key points about the components of fundamental movement skills. Canada Basketball, we have a coaching education website that houses a lot of more of this information, more examples, more coaches talking about it. We've got over 600 videos now that you can go in and listen to, as well as additional resources. Basketball.ca under Coach. The Coach tab is where you can actually register. It's $125 Canadian in order to go onto the site, but on basketball.ca under the Coach tab, there's additional resources, and coaching education uses this Twitter handle, I think that's what it's called, Twitter handle, Twitter address, in order to circulate more information around coaching education and things that are going on. So just wanted to share that with you. We also have the Super Clinic going on, so huge clinic in Canada, really cool weekend where we kick it off with what we call a chalk talk, and we absolutely cover the entire space with whiteboard sheets, and we've got the presenters from the weekend and different stations, and we circulate, and you get to meet the presenters before they present throughout the weekend. And we've got some people that were there last year, they're here today, but and can probably talk about it a bit more in their experience, but it's a really great experience. It's in Hamilton, Ontario this year, and we do have it annually. Our national teams coaches come on, and we've got education from the fundamental stage right up to Learn to Win going on that weekend. So it's everybody, all context, one weekend, celebration around education, sharing, connecting, and coaching basketball. We actually, I say coaching basketball, but we actually have referee training going on at the same time. So it's everybody's there working together around education. There's one last thing I just wanted to share with you. And we talked a lot about LTAD stages yesterday and how important that was. And so we created this video to really emphasize and celebrate our different stages of athletes and different disciplines around athletes. And so just wanted to share this video with you. So hopefully this is on. Okay, I'm going to try this here.
Oh, sorry.
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 Sorry. Sorry. Sorry.
Sorry. Sorry.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Sorry. Sorry.
So as Canadians, we apologize a lot and say sorry a lot. And but one thing I think that I just want to declare we're not sorry about is the changes we've made and the purposeful practices and the purposeful decisions and everything we've done up to this point to get where we are with our programs and our athletes. I don't know why I'm emotional about this, but I'm really proud of it. So we've all worked really, really hard to get there, and that's something we are not sorry about. So just wanted to share that, and you can do it too with your programs. I'm telling you right now, it's been a lot of years and a lot of people, but our athletes are fantastic, but you can do it too. And so being purposeful makes a huge difference. Huge strides, huge gains, and huge differences. And again, I'm sorry for a lot of things, bumping into people, and even when they bump into me, I still say sorry, but not sorry about this one. So just wanted to end on that. We've got a 15-minute break. Alex, is that still okay? We'll get the athletes and this taken down, and we'll get into some Dynamic 101. Great, thank you.